On October 7, 2023, Hamas militants breached what was considered one of the most secure borders on Earth, launching thousands of rockets and killing hundreds in a meticulously coordinated strike. The roots of this attack reach back to the 1980s. Archival records from that era reveal that the precursor to Hamas received financial backing and organizational support from the Israeli government itself. Senior officials who served in Gaza at the time, like Israeli Brigadier General Yitzhak Segev, later admitted to funneling funds to early Islamic factions. They deliberately kept the financial arteries open for the very groups that would eventually unite to form Hamas. The devastation of October 7th is the violent culmination of a decades-long policy of geopolitical blowback. A state actively nurtured the very faction that would grow to terrorize it. To understand why Israel would finance an Islamic faction in Gaza, we have to look at the map after the 1967 Six-Day War. In less than a week, Israel captured the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights. This map shows 2 million Palestinians now living under Israeli control. The Israeli government faced an impossible math problem. They could not expel this massive population, but granting them voting citizenship would mean losing the Jewish demographic majority. At the same time, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, was consolidating its power. Led by Yasser Arafat, this secular movement was gaining international recognition and unifying the Palestinian public against Israeli occupation. Confronted by a unified PLO and a booming Palestinian population, Israeli leadership realized they needed a strategy to fracture Arafat's political monopoly. They needed a counterweight. Down in Gaza, an Islamic cleric named Sheikh Ahmed Vassin was running a local branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. At the time, they were strictly focused on building schools, mosques, and charities, abstaining from the armed struggle completely. Israeli military authorities saw an opportunity. They officially recognized Yassin's charity and encouraged its growth, hoping this religious movement would peel support away from the secular, militant PLO. Then came 1987. A fatal traffic incident in Gaza triggered a massive, violent uprising across the occupied territories, known today as the First Intifada. Yassin and his leadership realized that if they stayed out of the fighting, they would lose all credibility with the furious Palestinian public. To stay relevant, they spun off a dedicated militant wing called Hamas, and it immediately began launching attacks on Israeli soldiers and civilians. The divide-and-rule strategy had backfired. The religious charity Israel had nurtured to keep the PLO in check mutated into a radicalized organization entirely out of their control. A few years later, the PLO and Israel attempted a historic compromise. At the 1993 Oslo Accords, Arafat and Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin agreed to a framework for a two-state solution, laying the groundwork for peace. Hamas rejected this treaty. They launched a targeted campaign of suicide bombings specifically calculated to destroy public trust and derail the diplomatic negotiations. As the peace process disintegrated, the PLO looked weak and ineffective to their own people. With the secular leadership discredited, Hamas capitalized on the frustration and swept the 2006 Palestinian elections. The political victory quickly turned into a bloody civil war. By 2007, Hamas violently expelled the PLO from the Gaza Strip, taking absolute control of the territory. In response, Israel sealed the borders, enacting a total land, air, and sea blockade. By 2007, the long-term trajectory of the 1980s strategy was set. The moderate Palestinian leadership had been sidelined, leaving Hamas in absolute territorial control and explicitly committed to Israel's destruction. Isolated behind the blockade, Hamas dug beneath the surface. They constructed an immense subterranean tunnel network stretching into Egypt, creating a direct smuggling pipeline to receive cheap, mass-produced missile components and funding from Iran. With no other allies willing to bypass the blockade, Hamas turned to Tehran. This partnership evolved from simple smuggling into a deep technical integration, with Iranian engineers providing the blueprints and funding that transformed a local militia into a heavily armed regional proxy. This map details the IMEC corridor, a U.S. trade route linking India to Europe through Saudi Arabia and Israel. This threatened a competing path, the INSTC, backed by Russia and Iran. If IMEC succeeded, Iran would lose billions in revenue and leverage. But the American trade route had one massive vulnerability. For it to work, Saudi Arabia had to formally recognize the State of Israel and normalize diplomatic relations. a diplomatic leap they were preparing to make in late 2023. This is the strategic calculation behind October 7th. By launching an attack so brutal, Hamas guaranteed a massive, destructive Israeli retaliation in Gaza. They knew the resulting civilian casualties would enrage the Arab world, making it politically impossible for the Saudi leadership to normalize relations. The gambit worked. The Saudi-Israeli talks halted, the U.S. trade corridor paralyzed, and Iran's position was protected. What began as a short-sighted bureaucratic maneuver in the 1980s to divide a political rival has matured. Today, it operates as a global geopolitical weapon, one that continues to tear the Middle East apart.